There we go. Good evening. Welcome to Kitsap County Administration Building. You know that we're going to be talking about a new courthouse tonight, so I'm really pleased to see all of you here, and thank you for coming. And we're going to do some presentations or offer some information, and then it'll be open to questions. So first of all, it's going to mean some really dramatic changes here at the courthouse and on the whole campus. So I see a couple of folks who'll be in the new building and eager to know what is going to be said tonight. But it's a really, really important process. It's important that you know what we're doing all along. We have had some presentations in the past, and we will continue to throughout the entire process. It's important for you to know what we're learning as we go along as well. Ron Thomas from Thomas Architecture Studios is here tonight to give you an overview, and after that there's an opportunity for you to ask questions or get clarification as you wish. So I'm going to hand the mic right over to Ron.
I'm going to push it to Mayor.
Okay. All right. Ron's going to hand. So that's okay. I am. If you don't know me, I'm Port Orchard Mayor Rob Putansu, and thank you for inviting me here this evening. I think I'd like to step back a little bit and share a little history. So, more than 15 years ago, the county, at I guess a point in time, the county and the city weren't getting along as well as they are today, and the county had plans to move the county seat to Bremerton, and we went to court to resolve that, and Port Orchard prevailed, and we now have the county administration building here. But Port Orchard recognized, and that was about the time I first got on our, more than 15 years ago, our planning commission. And Port Orchard recognized the county needed room, though, to grow their campus. And the land to the south here was zoned for that very purpose, and I'm really excited to see the county finally moving forward with some of those plans. And I'm also, the city is doing a master planning. We've got these exciting changes. We've got exciting changes downtown, but we've got to make sure that these they're connected, and from transportation to pedestrian connectivity, utilities, that all of this is going to work well together. And so we've recently hired a consultant to do a master planning exercise, and I know that Ron and his group and the county will be working hand in hand with the city through that exercise too, so that we make it sure that all of these potential projects work cohesively. So I'm excited to see tonight's presentation and assist any way I can.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Karen Goon, and I'm one of the project managers for the new courthouse. I'm so pleased you came out tonight. It's a little odd when you send out a bunch of postcards to 300 people and you hope someone shows up. It's a bit like having a party and hoping someone shows up. My role tonight is to give you a bit of a broad overview of how this project came about. A couple of housekeeping issues. We are taping tonight's presentation, and it'll be available on BCAT for you to watch over and over again if you have insomnia. There's cookies and lemon water in the back. Our web page is up to date and has FAQs on it. If you have questions that you might not get to ask tonight or think to ask later, you can go there. Our contact information is there. If you think of a question that you wanted to ask later, you can send that on through the web page. The other housekeeping matter I wanted to mention right off the bat is that through this project, we are doing limited property acquisition. We have another subconsultant who has already gone out and made contact with the property owners whose property we're interested in acquiring. So if you haven't heard from them, we're not interested in acquiring your property. We're keeping it pretty limited in scope just to be able to accommodate parking for the future. So turning back the clock a little bit to a couple of years ago, when the commissioner said the time is ripe for us to look at another courthouse. So we started out the conversation by saying, if we built a new courthouse, how big would it need to be, and could we fit it on what we're calling the super block, which is Division to Taylor, Klein to Sydney. And the importance of that was we wanted to be able to stay on property that we owned. because the cost of a project increases exponentially if you have to go out and acquire more property and relocate facilities and existing offices. So with that in mind, we hired Thomas Architecture Studio, and they brought on HOK, which is an internationally renowned courthouse designer, and we did some exercises with the departments that are in the courthouse right now, which is the clerk's office, the sheriff's office, Superior Court, Office of Public Defense, the law library, district court, and the prosecutor's office. And we worked with those departments to determine if what would be the maximum amount of square footage you would need for your needs looking forward, recognizing that technology is going to change that, and that growth patterns are going to change that, but what size of a courthouse would you need for the future? So Thomas Architecture, working with the departments, came up with 4 options. And the options ranged from $130 million to $154 million all in. And we said, we can't afford that because we're trying to stay within our existing revenue, which is REIT, real estate excise tax revenue that we're projecting out. We're not asking for any new revenue. What we're going to do to pay for this aspect or for this phase of the project is to bond against our debt limits and then use existing revenue that's coming in through real estate sales tax to pay off the cost of the bonds. We have some other bonds that are retiring that will hopefully allow us to go and build future phases, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So Thomas Architecture came back with option 5, which is what we're calling the hybrid option, which is extending a wing of the courthouse to the, I always have to get my directions straight, to the east, using an existing parking lot to expand to incorporate new courtrooms, new court offices, which will relieve the pressure in the existing courthouse. And so you'll hear the phrase new wing, phase 1, phase 0, and that's what I mean in terms of extending the wing of the courthouse to the east. You'll also hear the phrase adaptive reuse, which in our parlance means that those tenants or those departments that are staying within the existing courthouse are going to get minor improvements to their space to make their space a little bit more usable, to free up some of the constraints that they have. And so that's what we're going to focus on tonight, is explaining how we got to the new wing of the courthouse and the adaptive reuse of the existing courthouse. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ron.
Well, thank you, Karen, and Commissioner Garrido, and Mayor Patansu, for the introduction. I'm Ron Thomas, president of Thomas Architecture Studios. I have a PowerPoint prepared here this evening. I'm going to be going through it at a fairly steady clip. We will have plenty of time to go back. If there are images you'd like to look at again, just tell me at the end. With me this evening, I have Amos Calendar, wave here. Amos is our project manager, Sakal Kolbo. She's my business manager, kind of next generation leadership of our firm. They're really heavily invested in this project. As I clip through the slides here, we're going to have a little bit of an introduction, and you can see, but I'm going to point up here because I can see the slides that you're looking at behind me. And so introduction, a little background on the study area. What are we talking about? How big of an area? And then 2018 needs assessment. Karen referenced that, where we took a look at what are the needs and then what are options. That led to some decision making in early 2019, and then late 2019, and where we're at today is we're in master planning and schematic design. So we're just getting started with what is this building, where exactly is, how big is it, but I'm going to lead you right up to where we're at today. Our intention is to come back and have another public open house probably in about 2 months. And we'll share with you, okay, what is the building starting to look like? Because in schematic design, you're actually establishing the architecture, the scale of the building, what are some of the materials, how's it impacting the surroundings. So we want to keep this dialogue going in the months ahead. And then finally, we'll have questions and answers. So our firm is based out of Olympia, a modest-sized firm. We actually added one of our nation's leading justice facility architects, HOK. And the list of bullet items you see up there, this is what they bring to the table. They've literally done hundreds of courthouses across the country. And so they're way out on the cutting edge of things that we should be looking for, current trends, security, technology, and the list goes on. This is the bigger team, and you can see up the top, we answer to certainly Karen, but the commissioners directly. Karen's our direct project manager. Certainly, we have other department leads. Karen mentioned all the departments are involved. That's called the technical committee. But on the other side is the city of Port Orchard, Mayor Patonsu, but certainly the council. We've been keeping them up to date every 2 to 3 months while we're going through these various phases. We keep them posted. And you'll see up there also neighborhood and community. This is the first night of really our public open house meetings. Yes, you could have attended other city council meetings. Those are all open. But this is our first effort to really start getting out there and engaging the public. And then all of the other team members are shown towards the bottom of that. Those are all Puget Sound firms, so a lot of local firms that are involved in this project. The study area, those buildings in red, and they're described on the left there. So family support is the only function that's actually down the hill closer to your downtown area. Eventually, they will be coming up on the hill. Existing facilities, public works, the admin building, a lot of functions in there, and then you have the courthouse. So all of the functions that are in the current courthouse are part of this study, but so are the functions that are in the Bullard building. The prosecutor happens to occupy that right now. The jail, that's only impacted in an adjunct way. One of the primary purposes of locating the new facility on the superblock, the transfer of in-custody people. We're doing a number of other courthouses. I'll just use Thurston County as an example because it's a comparable size to Kitsap. They made a commitment years ago to locate their jail off-site. And so no matter where we put the new courthouse, you have to transfer. Now, project that every year for the life of the building, and you can see the operational costs really add up. So it was very wise decision-making to try to locate this new courthouse on the current site, and you're going to see how we accommodate that as I go forward with this. A few other sexual assault unit facilities there on the super block, and then of course the jail itself. This is considered the public facilities zone, so it goes from Dwight, which is just north of the admin building, all the way down to Smith, which is 1 block south of Taylor Street. You can see it on that red dash line there. This idea of this public facilities, as Mayor described, this happens to be an excerpt from your comp plan. That small yellow area that you can see up there, that's considered the county campus. Furthermore, you can see by uses that are described here in that light purple, community facilities. Or one step further, this is from your zoning code, and it says public facilities. So that light purple, that's all considered public facilities. So I commend the city of Port Orchard and the county for working collaboratively together over the decades, because this is a significant campus. You can't get away from that. And I'm going to be talking about master planning, and I'll explain more in just a few moments. But as we expand a little bit further south, again, it's been planned for this. Now, this is what Mayor was referring to. They just hired the consultant recently. Downtown master plan study areas are going to look at several different pockets of your downtown, perhaps even some of the areas in the yellow clouded area. And you can see a very clear connection between the county campus here and your downtown, what's called the west downtown entry. And so we will work collaboratively with the other firm. It has more to do with circulation of pedestrians, of vehicles, of transit. Connections are very important within a community. That's just an aerial of the downtown study area. Now, the 2018 needs assessment, I've had, and I'll explain. When you're a senior citizen, you have to exercise in order to prevent yourself from getting injured. I was exercising, I tore my Achilles and my calf here last week, and so that's what's going on. So excuse me if I'm propping myself up here throughout this discussion, but we've been working on county facilities for a little over a decade, and the discussion of we need to do something with this courthouse. We keep adding, and modifying. And so this is a little chronology of, in 1935, that area in the light green, you can see number 1. That's where the courthouse started. There was a courthouse prior, but that's one of the first early significant courthouses in Port Orchard for Kitsap County. And you can see the chronology through the years. Notice when the last major significant improvement was. 42 years ago. Now, that's not to say that that's the last time the courthouse has been modified, but they've been modifying it within the confines of the existing courthouse, or they've gone beyond to Bullard. They've gone down the hill. There's just no more room. None. And I'm going to explain that in just a little bit when I show you a needs assessment study. And then these are some of the things that we were doing in 2018. So visioning, analysis of potential sites, needs assessment, concepts, concept features, cost estimating for each of those concepts. Karen referred to that. Concept comparison, and then documenting all of it. We also, where do you start at the beginning? There's no real good documents for all of those various additions and modifications. So we started at the beginning. What have we got? What departments are there? What square footage are they using? Because as a department morphs over decades, people are working in a space because it's there. It might not even be the appropriate size space for them. It might be twice the size. Or some of them are in closets. They might be way shorter than they should be. But documenting what's existing and then stepping back. Even back then in 2018, they knew we had to look at this on a campus-wide. It wasn't about just the courthouse building. And this is the beginning of that study. So light green are public entrances. What do you see? I see a lot of public entrances. Light blue, auto entrances. I see a lot of auto entrances. Staff entrances in red. One of the functions of a contemporary courthouse is you limit the number of public entries, preferably 1. That's all. It's screened, 1 entrance. Now, you can see we're way beyond that. Or think of the impact of people coming and going to this county campus and the impact on the surrounding community. They're coming and going everywhere around the entire super block. And when I show you some of the master plan studies, we're going to try to limit that, the amount of access points. Next step. Well, what have we got on a master plan perspective? So in the red are the off-street parking. In the yellow are the on-street parking. And that totals up to 612, roughly. Now, we're not counting the spaces that are next to the admin building and public works. Those are so committed already. We're trying to stay around the super block between Division and Taylor. And so approximately 80 of those stalls immediately east of or to the right of the jail, they're taken up by jail and sheriff. So you almost have to subtract those. They're not available to the rest of us using courthouse. So we have about 532 stalls. The estimate on the bottom there, that is what's needed just within the next 10 years. You can see it totals up to 765. And if you live in the neighborhood, you probably know this very well. That we're way short, way short. And so here, I realize this is a spreadsheet. The numbers are fairly small, but I'll direct your attention. So I'm not going to add the numbers at the bottom. I'm going to direct your attention to, it says existing, it says 139,000 square feet. That's how much area is in the courthouse and a few of the associated buildings. Now, if you jump 2 columns over, it says current need to staff. So existing to standard. Standard is what are other comparable county offices, what kind of space are they in? What about a courtroom? What is its standard space? And so we're in 139 right now. We should be in, well, if you had it to standard, it would be 163, but if you had current need, and I'll give you an example, we don't have anywhere close to the number of district courts that we should have. We're even short on superior courts, and many of those courtrooms are way smaller than they should be. So if we did current need to standard, the courthouse today should be 186,000 square feet. And it's slightly under 140. Now, the yellow column, That is, where should we be in 10 years? Most of us can project ahead that far. There's a planning horizon that, okay, I can get my hands around. You have to understand, we're dealing with a lot of elected officials. They might not be here in 2030. Okay, but they have to do their best to project ahead. What are their departments going to need? Okay, now look ahead to 2045. Here we are in 2020. That's only 25 years, but generally that's the length of a bond payoff. So you better plan and build for at least 25 years. And that's what you see in the blue. So 218,000 square feet, that's our target. That's what we're designing to. Now, we modify, but that's very close. And I'm going to point out just two things here. Many of the departments, they're hardly growing at all. Technology's having a big impact. Remember the Great Recession? It wasn't that long ago. A lot of belt tightening in our wonderful state of initiatives. County general funds, they're tighter. So counties have done an amazing job of learning how to basically do as much as they possibly can in terms of services with less people, less space. Okay, going forward, that doesn't apply so well when you're talking about courtrooms. So notice the two departments that are growing by far the most. So I'll direct your attention to Superior Court and District Court. Superior Court has 17,815 before, it's called a building grossing factor. There's a lot of walls and hallways and things like that that you have to add in to get your building gross square footage. But you can see Superior Court at 17,000, District Court at 12. They should be in 48 and 19,000, and they're going to grow to 57 and 30. That's most of your growth right there. And there's a lot of spaces that go along with courtrooms that you flat out don't have right now. The simple act of going to meet with your attorney as you prepare to go into court, you know where it's done right now? Right in the hallway. Do you know where in-custody people, when they're bringing them, so an in-custody prisoner that's going to the courtroom, where do you think they walk down to get to the courtroom? Right down the corridor. The same one that maybe the accused and the accuser, they're literally this close together. You do not do that in contemporary courthouse design. I'm going to show you some diagrams about that. This is a diagram that's showing the number of court rooms, and we are currently at 11. We should be at 15. In 2030, we should be at 18. I'm looking at the third line down from the bottom, and in 2045, we should be at 20. That's what we're planning for. I'm going to explain later, we can't afford that now, so we're going to do it in phases, and I'll explain that further. Now, what I was just describing about the separation of public from in custody, or what about jurors, or what about judges? Those folks should be interacting until where? The courtroom. That's where they meet. They do not meet before that. And so this diagram, it's a generic diagram about contemporary courthouses, and I'm going to point here. I'm going to turn around so I can point out what you're looking at. Okay, public is in the yellow, the bright yellow. This is how they circulate up in stairs and elevators. Okay, the orange, this is where your judges and jurors circulate. The red, that's in custody. They're coming up in the building through elevators. Okay, and that's a controlled corridor. So there's a holding room, holding cell. When they're called to court, they come here and into one or two courtrooms. Now notice, orange, red, and yellow never meet until they're in the courtroom. Ever. Physically, they cannot cross paths. This is a problem in courthouse after courthouse after courthouse in the older courthouses throughout our state and quite frankly throughout our country. And so this is contemporary courthouse design. Now, Karen mentioned in 2018 we studied 4 options. I'm going to really touch base quickly, and I'm glad to come back to these, but option 1, that one is very tall. Okay. And we're not being ignorant to the fact that we have residences across the street on Klein. Okay, we're not. But if I wanted to do the most cost-effective courthouse construction, I'm going to do it in one phase, and I'm going to go vertical. That diagram I just showed you that had all those red elevators coming up through, they function better if it's a taller, if it's a multi-story. If I spread it out over a lot of acres, that means I have to have that many more in custody circulation to go up through. So there's a certain amount of efficiency that comes from having multiple levels of courtrooms. Okay, so this is the extreme. Option 1 is, but I can build it all at once. Option 2, less tall, and it assumes that we're building a lower rise, maybe 3 stories, right over the top of the existing courthouse. So right there, it's like, okay, where do people in the courthouse go? Well, maybe if you built the new courthouse to the south, maybe some of them could temporarily go in that while you're doing the demo. Now, option 3, that's a really different shape than the other 2, and that's literally having courthouses. It's a very thick building. Courthouses are opposite each other. It has its own complexities because now you have in-custody elevators coming up, popping up all over the building instead of in a line. So it's got its own complexities, but you can see a renovated courthouse. Well, actually, it's a new courthouse in place of the existing. Option 4, 1, 2, and 3 led to 4. And this one, again, is very similar to 2, but it's more stepped. And if you think of the admin building right now, the decline's very steep to the west of the admin building, but it's clearly a campus that steps down the hill. That's a good thing, and we're saying, well, perhaps the courthouse steps down the hill. Klein starts to level out, but it's still gaining another 12, 14 feet as it's going from Division back to Taylor. So maybe that building should also step down the hill. We then did his concept comparison. Some were quantitative, some were qualitative. We compared all of the options, and option 4 came out as number 1. And you can see how close it is to option 2. Actually, why does it say? Okay, so it's the high score was the winner, if you will. But you can see 4 and 2 are very close. So that general direction. So we presented to the commissioners. Here's the comparison. Okay, understand. Then they had to noodle on this because we gave the costs, and Karen, 130 to 150, right? And we're talking $130 million. That puts the project typically in the range of what's called a general obligation bond issue, something we would all vote on. In Thurston County, that's where they're going. In end of April, they're all voting on a new courthouse. They wanted to do it all at once. Your commissioners, and again, I've only been working on the courthouse for 10 years. Some Rob mentioned, Commissioner Garrido's been here a while, and so for at least a couple of decades, this has been discussed. And I applaud them for making this decision. It's like, no, we are not going to put this on the shelf. You know, you can imagine a lot of these reports, they just go and say, no, we can't afford it. And they, if you will, the tea leaves, we can't go out to a public vote. It's just not the time to do that. So, much to their credit, they asked us, will you go back and do one more? What if it was phased? What if we don't do it all at once? And so that's what the number 5, option 5, hybrid was on the bottom. It started to talk about what the phases are. So we would design it. Phase 0 is parking. If our building is going on top of an existing parking lot, where the heck are we supposed to park? Parking has to lead. You have to build the parking, preferably parking to start taking some of the pressure. I think it showed, almost 200 spaces short. So can we meet the parking that we're building the building on top of, but also try to take the pressure off of those 200 spaces short? So parking first, then we've got to lead with courts. Remember I mentioned that was the one area that we're woefully short on. So the predominant function of phase 1 should be courts. And then later you can follow on with the office use, and then finally the linkages. So option 5, that's what we're showing here. Okay, so phase 1 is the new South Courthouse. That's what you're seeing on the right. Those are 3 and 4 courtrooms per floor. The existing courthouse, the footprint stays exactly the same, but as soon as we finish phase 1, the new courthouse, then we start renovating the existing courthouse, but it's more moving walls around. partitions, that sort of thing. We're not talking about exterior facade changes, changing elevators and stairs and things like that. It's trying to buy years. You know, is it going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 before the second, third, and fourth phases happen? And as Karen mentioned, it depends on their paying down some of the other debt that the county has to win in those other phases. So we need to try to make the accommodations for the departments that are staying in the existing courthouse a little bit better than they are, so that they can provide better services to the citizens of Kitsap County. And so then, when the money is available, phase 2 is another roughly 3 courtrooms per floor for 4 floors that gets added on. And so all the patterns, remember that diagram about the public circulating down, the courtrooms, the judges, it just continues. So phase 2 is a very straightforward addition, but at the end of that, we now have 20 courtrooms. And then after that, we look at phase 3 is the west side, a rebuilding. You literally tear down the existing courthouse, build up 3 stories, and this is the clerk, district court offices, eventually sheriff. So in phase 4, you're again tearing down the east half of the existing. You're building that. Ideally, you'd build 3 and 4 together. That would be the most cost effective if the money was there. But we're showing how it can be done in up to 4 different phases. And this is the building. This is literally a cross section, north-south, right through the building, so you can see all the courtrooms, holding areas. That dotted line is Klein. And so we're literally almost burying an entire floor. You know, by the time you get to Taylor, you're not seeing the lower 12, 14 feet of that. And then one of the discussions at that time was perhaps there's judicial, called collegial chambers, where perhaps Superior and District Court are together. That's on the 5th floor there. And then the building steps down, down, and down as we go to the north on Klein. Here's the phasing diagram for option 5. So you can see phase 1, 2, and eventually 3 and 4, and the lobby. Now, that brings us to the commissioners' needed time to think this through. Is this the right approach? And eventually, in about mid-2019, they said, yes, this is the path we want to pursue. And so this is called Stage 1 services. So I'm trying to tie you into where we at in the whole design process. So for the last several months, we've been doing site information gathering, working on the parking solution, master planning, and then schematic design, the very early starts of it. So here we are in January. In the coming months, we're actually working on the schematic design for the building. We're continuing on with master planning. So we've identified all the issues. Now we're trying to come up with the solutions. And then in about March and April, this is where costs come in. We are discussing with the city of Port Orchard the master plan, which we hope leads to a development agreement. Why? Because this isn't going to all be built at once. Typically, you'd go get a land use permit and a building permit, and you go build it. Well, we might build this over 10, 15, 20 years, so you do a development agreement. This is where we commit to, we the county commits to the city that we will do these improvements at this time schedule. So I'll give you an example. With phase 1, we're going to do these road improvements, these utility improvements, this amount of parking. Phase 2, we're going to do these improvements. That's a discussion, negotiation, and we'll keep you informed of that as we go through our open houses to let you know what's coming with each one of these phases. Then an actual legal document, a development agreement, is signed. That becomes the basis for the land use approval. That's what paves the way for us to then move forward with the actual building permits. Now, that's only stage 1. This is stage 2 services. They will pick up roughly when stage 1 finishes here in the spring. And you can see we're continuing to work and front loading the parking solution. So that has to really light a fire, because ideally at the end of 2020, we're actually starting construction. And then by about fall of 2021. So I'm sorry, it's showing, can you see up there April, May of 2021? We're trying to finish the parking lot by that time because if you jump all the way to down that pink color, that's when you start construction for Phase 1 courthouse. The parking lot has to be done by then so that we lessen the impact on the surrounding community. And there's certain circulation that we're no longer going to do towards Klein Avenue, which I'll show you in a bit. So 2020, 2021, we're finishing the design work for Phase 1 of the courthouse, getting it bid, so it'll be a design, bid, build. So this will be publicly bid and then built. I should have mentioned, after Phase 1 is built, you can see it'll wrap up towards the end of 2022. They'll move in. That's what allows us to then start renovating the existing courthouse. And I can tell you, the dollar amounts for renovating a courthouse, they're like 1/10 of what it is for the new courthouse. They're not a lot of money, but we hope to get a lot of bang for our buck in terms of improvements for departments. And that'll take the better part of a year because you're literally improving one department, shifting, improving another. So you're literally doing the improvements while you're operating in the building. It's going to take a little while to do that. Now, many of you, if you're in the neighborhood, you've seen a lot of the work going on out there. Survey, geotechnical work, traffic. A lot of traffic analysis is going on, trip generations, parking counts, utilities. The city does have some record of what's out there, and we're really making a robust record of exactly what's out there, what size of lines, what are the invert elevations, basically how far below grade are some of those lines. So very good information on that. We did get good feedback on geotechnical. There was just a lot of old stories about where the gully used to go through. Turns out it continued south, not. Some have discussed it basically hanging a right and heading west, basically below the jail. Well, turns out those are very good soils. They're good soils below where we're talking about expanding. Less so. There has been some fill over the years, over the decades, centuries, where that parking, well, anyhow, south of Taylor Street. So here's the overall. I'm actually to the west looking at the county campus, and our master plan is going to take into account all of the blocks surrounding the county campus here. And when you think of the campus, it really is this series of nodes as you work your way up Klein. So the stepping of the admin building, then up to division, onto the existing courthouse, and then beyond. And so that's one of the things we're taking a look at as we approach the master plan of this project. Circulation, very important as we look at the buildings. And excuse me, but I've now twisted around and now I'm looking north. The others were looking the opposite direction. I'm now looking north. These are the existing buildings. In the yellow is the potential new. And we're studying auto circulation. Where's transit going? Where are pedestrians going? This is a large look at auto circulation. So Sydney is an arterial road, very different than Klein. When we're looking at the master plan, it's our thought to try to concentrate more of the traffic to Sydney, take some of the pressure off of Klein. Both Port Orchard Police and County Sheriff have made it clear that as you're coming up Klein to Division, I don't remember how many months ago, maybe it was less than a year ago, but remember how you can't turn left. You're not supposed to. Let me put it that way. You're not supposed to turn left as you come up Klein. It's problematic. Ironically, so is as you turn onto Klein, doesn't matter which direction, Sydney or Klein, that you come from, you're basically driving. Division is a parking lot, right? We're coming and going, short-term parking. Now, it's nice to have your parking right next to the door. And I'm voting for that, especially on crutches, but it's problematic. It really is. And so their preference is to eventually, maybe after phase 3 and 4, you actually close off Division. Get rid of it. Get rid of that safety. So we have to be thinking about that and how we travel. Notice the big gray area says parking. As I show you more of the master planning documents, This is one of our primary opportunities, and where some of the property acquisition is being pursued. The county already owns a large portion of that, the 2-block area. This is a potential for parking, and that's what allows us to build the courthouse south of the existing courthouse. That's shown here in the purple between south of Taylor, between Sydney and Klein. And there's also another parking lot that's up by Division and Sydney. It's shown in that light blue color called Lot A on that diagram. It's actually multiple lots right now, gravel lots. Yeah, here you go. Oh, come on, where's my pointer? Oh, okay, that's the lot I'm talking about. So that's a potential new, improved, I'll call it, lot. And then this is the other large lot here. This is obviously all paved right now, but we'd have a new access off of Taylor, and this would be secure parking. That's another thing that the county is lacking. Our security for our parking for judges and electeds and that sort of thing is a bar that goes down. That's all. Not a lot of security. Oh, and by the way, when somebody's released from jail, they're released right next to where the judges park. Again, not good. And then much of the parking here will probably remain for facilities and the jail. However, what we're suggesting is that the main access move south. Right now it's about right here. We're suggesting it moves south to line up with Ada Street. That will help clean up the circulation in that area. So the other thing, the diagram to the right of that, that's showing pedestrian circulation. So if we're parking south of Taylor, how do you get back to the facility? How to in custody circulate through the facility? And we'll show you more about that. This is a little bit larger. In custody release, in custody access, and pedestrians. Now, this is just one example of one of the departments and the detailed analysis that we do. So in our stage 1 studies that we're doing, we have to go back to 2018, what has changed, any updates, and so we did all of that. There are one or more of these sheets for every department, and they all total back up to this. And here again, we're going to look at the total building gross square footage that's shown right here, and that one's 221. So very similar to what it was previously. You can see the gaps here. And so we update all of that because all of our building layout. Now, this is called a relationship diagram. This is not architecture. It's showing if I had a courtroom, what are the functions that need to be around that courtroom? We diagram it all, and we review in detail with all of the department heads, the judges. They all have to agree on that diagram. Then we start translating that into architecture. Now, in terms of the architecture, we are studying what are the influences. Obviously, our beautiful setting here above Sinclair Inlet, the geography, the sloping site. We go all the way back. Native American influence, Native tribes, big influence. And they did, I just appreciate at least a gesture towards it in this admin building, if you've ever seen some of the beautiful doors. So the integration of art with architecture, and we're suggesting that really should be a part of this new courthouse. Maybe you even carry it one step further, and does it become part of the exterior facade of the building, part of the landscape design? And we're suggesting that it probably should, because when you go right back to it, it speaks more to nature. And so we feel that that's something we really should be studying. This idea of stepping the building seems very appropriate for this site, and the idea of adding scaling elements that do their best not to overwhelm the adjacent single-family residential. This is a big building. I'm not going to kid my way around that, talk away around it. It is a big building. However, this idea of stepping, very important. Okay, I'm going to show you now. As much as this looks like architecture, that's not our intent. Our intent is to show massing and volumes that are reflective of the square footage that we need. And so that's where we're at today is steady. And so phase one, that's actually the square footage that we need. That's the number of floors that we need. Phase two gets added to that. Phase 3 and 4, a lower building stretching along Division. I mentioned Division gets made into a pedestrian way is one of the thoughts. And then I'm going to point out one of the things from a master planning discussion. We have made the decision or the recommendation that the future entry to this entire courthouse complex be exactly where it's at right now. They did a great job of making an axial relationship of this admin building straight across to the courthouse. Now, one of the reasons we're saying that is eventually on the master plan, I mentioned the large parking lot here south of Taylor, but eventually, right here at Sydney and Division, we're suggesting long term. Now I'm talking about when phase 3 and 4 happen, a parking structure. I've just cut the distance from my parking to the main entry by about 67%. So it's 1/3 the distance. If you were to go to this entry all the way from Taylor, or if you go simply east 100 yards, you're right at that new parking structure. And our suggestion is, if some of you know the big goalie and that sort of thing, maybe the parking structure go actually down. Don't think of it as always going up. Maybe it goes down a little, up a little, so it doesn't overwhelm the adjacent residential. But now all of a sudden we could locate 300 to 400 cars very close to these new improvements. And I kept referring to the whole stepping down. This is a graphic that shows you how the building is stepping down as a campus, downcline. The scale is coming down as you work your way down the campus. So the things that we're working on now, master plan, all of that circulation, how are people getting in and out of the parking lots, the phasing of the construction, what are these buildings looking like, what are the materials, and so that is where we're at. We're going to be doing that for the next few months. Again, I'd like to circle back to present this to you, show you where we're at, and so with that, I'm going to stop talking and start listening. I'm going to have Amos and Sakah helping us. We have a chart up here, and I'm going to try to capture your questions. I may not be able to answer all of your questions, but I will. If I can't answer it tonight, and sometimes there are answers. I can just tell you what some of our thinking was, but everything is fair game. Can't offend me. Whatever question you have, there are no dumb questions, naive questions. Some of you live right next to this. Some of you live somewhere else in town, so you're coming at it from a different perspective. So again, ask away whatever you'd like to. And then, by the way, a lot of materials getting posted to the county's website. The address is there. I think it was also on the flyers that you were mailed. Or if you want to just access the county's website and just enter courthouse, and it'll take you right there. Okay. Go ahead. Whoever wants to go first, hand up and go ahead.
I have two, actually. The parking lot, the big parking
Yes.
lot, are you paving that?
Good question. So yes, that would be paved. It has to meet all current stormwater standards.
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, thank you. Yes, the question was the big parking lot that was shown on those master plan diagrams south of Taylor, is that going to be a paved parking lot? And the answer is yes, it has to meet all current stormwater standards, landscape standards. And so, as you know, that area, Taylor slopes, it slopes down from Klein and slopes down from Sydney, little valley in the middle. And what we do is we take some of the edges off the east and west, smooth that out just a little bit, a lot of planting on the edges. So Port Orchard has requirements, landscape requirements for screening parking lots from adjacent residential areas. They have requirements for street trees. They have requirements for, basically, there are improvements in the public right-of-way that just don't exist right now. On Smith Street, there are no sidewalks and curbs. We have to put all of that in. When we do the parking lot, we have curb, planter strip, new sidewalk, and then eventually a transition down to where the parking lot wants to be in its final, all paved, And then we have to retain a certain amount of stormwater on site, and so there will be holding facilities under the pavement. Nobody can see them, but they allow us to release the stormwater in a controlled manner. We can't overwhelm the city's current system. So,
And my
good
second
question.
question is, why would you not do a parking structure first?
Very good question. Budget. And so the price of a surface parking stall is 8,000-9,000, somewhere in that per stall. The price of a structured parking, it would vary depending on the scale of the project, anywhere from about just under 30,000 per stall to about 40,000 per stall. The price goes down the larger the parking structure. So we would love to do a parking structure. Cannot afford it. And that's why I mentioned that eventually in phase 3 and 4, I hope we can afford it by that time. And then we're planning, I mentioned the 25-year horizon, and we believe we're planning closer to about 50 years. But I don't think this campus is going anywhere. And so that property south of Taylor, maybe someday there are actual buildings, because that's how counties grow. You grow vertical. You can't keep going spreading out horizontal. And so someday maybe that's a development site in the future.
So the paved parking lot would ultimately be a building at some point?
We'll see. That's going to be beyond my lifetime, but I'm just saying that could be a placeholder for 50 to 75 years out. But for now, the current vision, that is surface parking lot. And we will be doing...
Really environmentally friendly.
I one of the best things you can do is dense vertical when it comes to paving, but I again applaud the commissioners for making the decision. What can we do with, and they've come up with a budget, what can we do with this amount of money? Tell us what we can do. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're doing schematic design. By the end of schematic design, we'll know how big is the building, what's its facade, what's the structure, what are the mechanical, enough where our cost estimator can do a legitimate cost estimate. It's no longer just, courtrooms are running at $300 and something a square foot. No, we're actually pricing it out. When we give that back to the commissioners, then they'll have more decisions and direction that they'll give us. We'll modify, then we'll go forward with the construction. Yeah.
Well, I just remember you saying that there should be one entrance
Yes,
into
yes,
a court campus.
yes.
And I can't remember where you said that entrance.
Okay, good question. The question is, I had mentioned during the presentation that a courthouse should ideally have one entrance, and where is that entrance going to be? So the entrance to the courthouse that you currently have, really right across the street from us, that's going to remain the entrance for the entire duration. And so let's say when we do phase 1, you're literally going to walk through the existing entry. We're going to improve the screening right now. We have one screener. If you're 2 or 3 people, you're out in the rain, right? And so we're going to improve that so more people can get in queue. We're going to have multiple screenings there and get some elbow room to that lobby. And there's a north-south corridor that's very narrow that leads to the back side of the courthouse. We're going to widen that. That becomes your main circulation through to the new courthouse. Okay, but when we do phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, you're going to come through a beautiful now new, larger, better screened lobby, but you're still going to come through that one entrance. And the only exception to that would probably be judges, perhaps jurors. It's best if once you're impaneled on a jury, and depending on what that case is, sometimes it's wise to give them some secured parking as well. Yes?
How many cars in the parking lot?
In the area south of Taylor, just slightly over 400. Amos, is it 435?
432, I believe. Yeah.
432. He's my project manager. And we're working closely. One thing is code-required landscaping. The other thing is what should it be? And I'm talking about SEPTED principles. This has to do with community policing through environmental standards. And so you want to have a certain amount of screening out of respect for the adjacent residential, but you also don't want to screen it so much that people can't see what's going on. We will have several call stations for people that are parking there. They're basically emergency call stations. You need an escort. We'll be right there. And then we will actually be turning our diagrams within weeks back over to the county. They have staff that manage all the parking. I don't know, some of you don't know, but some of the staff have to pay for parking if they want to be a little bit closer, or if they don't, they can park way south by Taylor. And so we're going to they get to decide what's free, what's paid, where's secure. We'll make recommendations, but anyhow, so a little over 400.
When are you going to start with the parking lot? When is that expected?
Okay, we're hopefully going to start construction of the parking lot this fall. Yeah, so a little less than a year, we hope to start construction.
So the public, you're going to park up there and then have to come around to the front?
That's correct. That's correct. Staff, public, and it's less than ideal. We all agree with that. We may prioritize. So we're hoping that we can afford the improved surface parking lot at Division and Sydney. It's 90-ish parking stalls. It's not a little. I mean, it'd be wonderful to have those, and we might prioritize those to certainly accessible, to van parking, maybe jurors. Try to prioritize it, or just short-term parking. We will not be getting rid of the parking along Division. It might be decades. Probably not till phase 3 and 4, because we've had the question is like, well, where does somebody who's handicapped park? Or what if I'm just dropping off my ballot? We're going to address those. Or Amos is in discussions with Kitsap Transit. How can they circulate through? Like, do we really want to close off Division? If so, then where's the bus going? And so maybe Division is very narrow, one way, towards Klein. And so it's very purposeful. But we're going to be discussing just where's the right balance in that for a master plan. Okay, next question.
How many stalls are in Division right now?
Question is, how many stalls are on Division right now? Do you know off the top of your head? Wolf.
172 surface parking around the entire block.
But off of Division, if I was to venture a guess, it's somewhere between 30 and 40. Somewhere around there. Yeah, right back here.
Related to the parking, during construction, you're going to have additional parking needed because you're going to have
Contractors.
construction workers
Yeah.
and contractors.
Yeah.
And that's probably more of a city problem with their enforcement of their existing parking, or that they may have to do something because I live in the 900 block of mine, and
Yeah.
on a heavy jury day, they're parking.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so one of my thoughts was, let me see if I can go back. Well, you remember the phase. Oh, I'm going to point at that right there. You remember the phasing. Oh, so phase 1 is back here. So there will be a small parking lot right here when we're constructing phase 1. I believe that the contractor will ask for that for his lay down. So they have to lay down materials as they're getting shipments and that sort of thing. I think the contractor will also ask for this quarter of the parking lot for all their construction trailers and whatnot. Now you have to remember that leaves us 350 parking stalls. So that will accommodate the parking that was below here. But we're probably going to lose this parking during construction. Staging, cranes, that sort of thing. And so all of this needs to accommodate all of that, plus a lot of the shortage. So we feel like it will do that. And I didn't mention that it's our recommendation. Right now, Taylor's a one-way street. Our recommendation that becomes two-way street, and that all access to that parking lot be only off of Taylor, not off of any of the streets that access the residential area. So we are purposely taking access points away from Klein. There are currently numerous parking lot access points along Klein, here. We're taking all of those away. Here's another thing that we're doing. This parallel parking that's along the east side, so the west side of Klein will stay the same because that's adjacent to your residences. The east side of Klein, no parking. Why? Blast resistance. This is a county facility, not a federal facility. We have different levels of security, but we would prefer that somebody not park a vehicle that has explosives that close to our building. We will have security bollards so nobody can drive. It prevents people, from simply driving, jumping the curve and driving right into the building. And so that's our recommendation, that we have no parking on the east side of Klein. And then, of course, all the landscaping, tree improvements, and that sort of thing all along there.
Now, it's 2-hour parking on Klein Street, just north of Taylor. Are they going to change that to 2-hour further down now, further north?
That's a good question. Let us look into that. So you were saying that this is 2-hour parking?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously if that's gone, but south here, I don't recall if that's 2-hour parking.
I believe that's all day parking.
Okay, all day parking. Our intention, I'd prefer not to change that. So if it's all day currently, I'd prefer that it be all day going in the future. But I would be interested in anybody that lives in that area, I'd be interested in your feedback. If you would prefer that it be 2-hour or is all day because you have guests, and other people that might want to park there. So I would seriously listen to your input in that regard. Yeah.
I wouldn't have a problem with the 2-hour, but they could at least give us a sticker then for our car that says
resident.
Or
Yeah.
belong here.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. Now, one of the things that we'll be interested in and in discussing with the county is, can the majority of the Taylor Street parking lot be free? And what that would do is it would take pressure off of the on-street parking. A lot of people park on-street because they don't have to pay for it. And so could we actually create the Taylor Street parking lot as free? And I don't want to answer that question because they have a lot of parking to manage. And I'm myopically, in some ways, focusing in a lot of the discussion on the courthouse. People that work in the admin building here in Public Works, they have to park, sometimes clear up at Taylor Street. This is a county-wide parking issue. Yes?
I can't remember, why would you move west on Klein instead of south for parking?
West on
Why
Klein.
not cross Klein and go this way for parking?
Here, I'm going to turn around here. Why not go across here? We did at least discuss that in a brainstorming session, and the feeling was you're now getting into an area that's not zoned for public facilities, and it is residential. Now, mind you, it's only 1 block before you get to the gully. Or I had somebody bring up the issue. I'm not going to say who it was, but they said, if you go 1 block, and there's actually a gully, a big hill right there, you reach a connector that goes right, it goes down to is a boulevard, isn't it? And so the question is, gosh, would you ever consider just connecting the big parking lot right through there? Maybe in the future. And so for now, we decided not to go to the west. From a proximity standpoint, it's very enticing because, my gosh, if you get a parking structure or surface parking lot right there, you're literally right next door. You'd have to bring the crosswalk further south because you don't want to cross right there at the top of the Klein Hill. You'd be clipping people. But that's a very insightful observation. Yeah, and so we were concerned about its impact on the neighborhood. Yeah. Yes?
So, when you complete this parking lot, and we're going to lose some parking there through the building, what is the net we're gaining?
I think it was about 250 stalls.
250 that we don't have today.
Correct. Yeah, that's the shortage, and we're going to be gaining. We're going to be covering all of them. And I should have mentioned, excuse me, when we add the parking structure, eventually, we'll be over 1,000 parking stalls, which is where we project that you're going to need at full build-out. And so, and your question about could you go west? Do you a parking structure where the surface parking lot? Because I do agree with you, from an environmental standpoint, surface parking lots are not good. But we also have to recognize where we are as a county, Kitsap County and Port Orchard, we're going through a metamorphosis now where we're turning from a rural community to a little bit more urban, and all the master planning that's going on, it's moving you towards a little bit more of an urban downtown. The idea of having housing downtown, the idea of structures now going to 3, 4, 5 stories. It's like, what's going on here? Well, that's the maturing of a community. And so the same would apply to the county campus. We're a balance. I told you about the taller courthouse because of the functional need, but the other buildings we're doing are only 3 stories. So we're in between that. And again, if somebody's having this conversation in 50 to 75 years, they're going to be talking about, oh, we're only going 5 floors, not 3. And so eventually cities need to be building up and not spreading out. Yeah. Other questions? You guys are asking great questions. Yes, sir.
Okay, I've been going to Spain for 20 years, and one thing I've seen...
Thank you.
Well, I've lived here for 20 years, near the courthouse.
Okay.
One thing I've seen is a lot of these beautiful plans.
Studies and renderings.
There was a plan when I first moved in the neighborhood for structured parking.
Okay.
That was over 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I have a feeling that you're presenting us with a lot of best-case scenarios, but what's actually going to happen is, look around, you see the dirt parking lots we have.
Oh, good point. Good point.
This is a beautiful building here, but
Yeah.
what we ended up with, what the neighborhood ended up with, were dirt parking lots.
Yeah.
So I'm, for one, my first comment would be, you're presenting best case scenario. What we're actually going to get is going to be quite a bit different.
Okay. Okay.
And the next comment is, when they built these dirt parking lots, they lobbied, I have the minutes of the meeting, the county lobbied that the city of Port Orchard's design standards were too strict, that they couldn't do what they wanted to do,
Wow.
having to adhere to design standards.
Uh-huh.
Is that going to be part of the discussion? Is there going to be discussion with the city to lower the standards?
Okay. So I'll reiterate his question for those of you who didn't hear. And so he's been a part of county meetings, community meetings for the better part of 20 years, and a lot of discussion about parking structures and other renderings for improvements have been shown, rarely ever achieved. And so there's a healthy amount of skepticism in the images that we're showing. Are they really ever going to be achieved? Did I summarize?
Yeah, that's
okay.
good.
And so I'll try to answer it with our intentions, and there's a pattern and a process that I think is going to be different than the past, in that I mentioned we're doing a master plan. So that's visionary. So that might be is like, are you really ever going to build all the things you're showing in phase 1 through 4 and all these improvements? Okay, what I can commit to is at least phase 1. So we have to do the master plan, and then we have to show and negotiate with the city in terms of what improvements we're doing for each phase. And then we have to go out and get the land use approval and get the building permits. And so we have to design these to current standards. So those standards for site development and stormwater, these type of things, they've changed dramatically over the last 20 years. So if I try to go out there and build a big gravel parking lot, the answer is no. Flat out, no, can't do it. Cannot. So as we work with the county, we're committing. And so I can tell you, if we're doing that parking lot, 432 spaces in Tyler Street, it's going to be paved, it's going to have proper stormwater detention, proper landscaping, so that will be done. And I will mention, we did assign, budget to that. And then phase one, that's what we're working on. And so as soon as we settle on size, look, and that sort of thing, commissioners, when they give us the approval to continue on in 2020 to do the design for the actual building permit, they're committing to those dollars. So I can say, I can commit to you that in phase one and the parking we're showing, that's going to get built. Now, what I can't commit to you, and I'm going to be straight up, is that, well, when is phase two? When's phase three? When's phase four? Economy. When are other indebtedness coming off the books? Future initiatives. But I can tell you the master plan we're doing is meant to meet all the way back to those spreadsheets I showed you, and I showed you 220-some thousand square feet of square footage we're trying to build. That's what that master plan is based on. We're trying to meet that because that's how we meet all of the county's needs. We do this for a living, and I'm not in it for pretty pictures. We're in this to actually see it designed and built. And I have a great deal of faith in your commissioners currently because, again, I go back, they could have made the decision last year to just shelve it. We don't have the money. We're not going to pass the bond issue. They figured out another way to say, okay, here's what we've got. Here's what we can take on now. Now you go back and tell us what we can do. And that's what we did.
Another point to the design standards, I just read
Yeah.
reviewing the design standards for parking.
Yeah.
They cannot be more than 1,000 feet from the entrance. You're only going to have one entrance, that's going to be on Division. And if you have to walk around the building, that parking lot would meet city code.
Yeah, we have a lot of alternatives for parking beyond just the Taylor Street. But we will make a note of that and make sure that's in compliance with the city standards. So 1,000 feet, I think is what he mentioned.
Comment and a question.
Go ahead.
Right now, you could build structure parking on property you own. You don't own that property presented there in the picture.
Yeah.
Are you going to use eminent domain to take that property?
Would prefer, I think the county would prefer not
Yes
to.
or no?
The county would prefer not to. That's the answer.
Commissioner Dorito, can you address that?
It hasn't even been discussed.
Yeah.
At this point, I would have to talk to the other two. Maybe we can do a workaround of this. You don't have to do it.
So this isn't set in stone. You are, you do have the potential to accommodate people who aren't doing so.
And they are.
And so I think the position was there are some parcels that the county does not own. This was the preferred option from a budget standpoint, and they've approached those people in discussions, and hopefully they can come to an agreement. And so what decision was made for budget reasons is that they don't have the money to do a structured parking at this early phase. Too much of the money is available would go just to that structured parking and not to the courthouse construction. So again, we're trying to meet a lot of demands here for parking, for the new construction, for quite frankly, street, road, sidewalk, landscaping improvements that have to be done along with this first phase. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a mock-up design for what it will look like on Smith Street? It would be
What would the view of the parking lot look like?
sidewalk and all the easements that you'll be taking for Smith.
Okay. When you come back in 2 months, we'll be able to show you good drawings of that. And so, I'm sorry, I don't. So we'll have a good drawing that shows, okay, basically what are the half-street improvements? Where's the curb, the planter strip, the trees, the sidewalks? So we'll have all of that to show you what it's going to look like. Yeah. Yeah. And that will apply to the parking lot, but also all of the site improvements that are around the Phase 1 development as well. Yes.
Will you be putting sidewalks on both sides of Smith Street or just on the one side?
Just on the one side that's adjacent to the parking lot. Generally, that's what the city requires, is that whoever's developing it, county or anybody, you take care of the right-of-way improvements that are on your half of the street. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm going to grab my water. So, other questions? Thank you, Rob. Other questions? Go ahead and think about it for a sec. Yes, ma'am.
So at this point, if the widening's been in any, I mean, it's pretty narrow.
You know, that's actually a very good question, because the city has standards for, depending on what type of street it is. Some of the streets, Smith might be a good example, they're below what the current standards are. And so,
I need to open it for you, too.
Pathetic, yeah. Mayor didn't know he's going to be doing that tonight. And so what you could find is, you know how there's a gravel edge and it just surface drains. And so what you might find is we're actually going in. It would appear that we're taking some of the property for the curbs, planter, sidewalk, when in reality, that space was always the city's. It just wasn't developed. And so we'll take a look at that. Yeah.
I'm on the corner of Smith and Klein, and we gave the city basically the
Yeah,
option, knowing
yeah.
that you were coming.
Good point. Okay, good point. And the other thing we take a look at is certainly crosswalks, that sort of thing, bulb outs. Anything that we can do to make it more pedestrian friendly, we'll be doing that sort of thing. Yeah. Other questions? And remind me, Karen, is there a place on the website where people can enter questions? How do they do that?
Our email contact is on the website. We've uploaded a PDF file of your presentation tonight under resources that people could take a closer look at. So we're at 7:45.
Oops.
And we wanted to be mindful of your time tonight. Ron and his team will stick around for a few minutes if you have any other questions. And so thank you so much for coming. Please take cookies on your way out. Load up your pockets. That's okay with me. Oh, and there's a sign-in sheet too, if you'd like to be added to our mailer.
The purpose of the sign-in sheet is so we can. The purpose of the sign-in sheet is so we can actually email you directly, and to make sure you get invited back for future open houses.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Good questions. And if there are questions you didn't want to ask in a large setting like this, come on up, ask them. Happy to address them.
So I'm assuming you'll send out postcards again?
Yes. Yes. Did that work? Seemed to work? Yay. Good.
It's better than getting the wrong address thing to my house. That's always fun.
Good point.
Well, so it'll be